Prepare to get started this afternoon. I'm Mo Wright, President of Raymond Consulting and Chair of the CMC Board of Trustees. Thank you all for joining us on this sprint toward spring. I'm excited to see some sunshine. I'm sure you are as well. Today's conversation features nationally syndicated columnist and author Cal Thomas. Mr. Thomas has an interesting and well-informed take on the political spectrum as we look forward to hearing from him today on everything that's going on in our nation and perhaps even locally. As many of you know, we were intentional about scheduling this forum the day after the Ohio primary, and so I'm sure that will come up in today's conversation. Mr. Thomas will make opening remarks and will sit down with our very own Carol Looper, retired television journalist and member of the CMC Board of Trustees, for the conversation following his remarks. So without further ado, I give you author and columnist Cal Thomas.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mo, and thank you for inviting me to Columbus, home of the world-famous restaurant, The Top. Thank you very much. Yes, see, little local identification there, made famous by my good friend Bob Green, native of Columbus, and he sends greetings to you from wherever he is today. He emailed me this morning. Very excited that I was here. I must say, though, inviting someone like me to speak to this prestigious group is another indication of how standards are falling everywhere, but I'm grateful for the opportunity nevertheless. In the film Girl Interrupted, Winona Ryder plays a patient in a psychiatric hospital. And one night she's watching the news on television. This is in the 60s. She's watching a demonstration. Might have been a civil rights demonstration, could have been an anti-war demonstration. And the voiceover reporter says the following: "We live in troubled times. The institutions we once trusted no longer seem reliable." Well, now, isn't that an editorial comment on our day? We have political turmoil, economic turmoil, social and moral turmoil, and this election season, and I've been following them with interest since I was a college freshman in 1960 at American University in Washington, the Kennedy-Nixon race, which was civil by comparison to what's going on today, more like a World Wrestling Federation match with smackdowns and all kinds of other outrageous behavior. I've never seen anything like this. People ask me for predictions. I haven't a clue, which makes it great for my profession, but probably bad for the country. But what is going on? I refer you back to a satirical song written by Cole Porter in the 1930s, which I think speaks a lot to what's happening today. In olden days, a glimpse of stocking was looked on as something shocking. Now, heaven knows, anything goes. Good authors who once knew better words now only use four-letter words writing prose. Anything goes. The world has gone mad today, and day's night today, and black's white today. And those guys today, the women prize today, are just silly gigolos. Yes, okay. I had to get a song in because Carol and I are simpatico when it comes to Broadway musicals. The title of my latest book, What Works, is I think what politicians and Americans ought to be, not that there's a distinction, but ought to be talking about. We have a history. We have a past. We don't live in the past, but we ought to learn from it. We are not the first generation ever to walk the earth. We don't have to invent the wheel. We don't have to discover the use of fire. There are people who've gone before. The Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun. Everything you think has been thought before. Everything you do has been done before. So why do we repeat, like the movie Groundhog Day, the things that have proven false in the past and not pay attention to what is working? It's the most amazing thing. The closest we get to history today, it seems, is the instant replay. We think, my grandchildren, well, they got the internet, they got tweets, they got all kinds of social media, but they don't have a whole lot of sense. Our politics today has become like floor wax, all shine, no depth. Well, what can we learn from the past? Well, let me suggest a few things to you today. First of all, when I was growing up, sign of advancing age when you start talking like that, we penalized as a culture and discouraged the things we said we wanted less of, and subsidized and encouraged the things we said we wanted more of. Now it's flipped. We penalize and discourage the things we say we want more of, and subsidize and encourage the things we say we want less of, and are then shocked to find we're getting more of what we want less of and less of what we want more of. Does that make sense? It doesn't to me. So let me share with you a little wisdom from the past, and I won't tell you who said it until the end. These are things that Thomas Jefferson might have called self-evident truths. At least they were when I was growing up. There is no dignity quite so impressive, the man said, and no one independence quite so important as living within your means. Well, that certainly is in contrast to one of our presidential candidates who has promised everything for free. Manna from heaven. He's going to change the letters from USA to ATM. I mean, everything's going to be free. What a world. I'm surprised he hasn't promised free groceries. We're going to have free medical care. We're going to have free college tuition. Nobody has to pay for anything. And those evil, mean, rich people on Wall Street are going to pay for it all. You know something, as a young reporter, I interviewed a lot of rich and successful people. I never envied them. I said, where'd you go to school? What's your philosophy of life? I might want to be like you someday. But now the attitude is, if you earn $2 and I make $1, you owe me 50 cents to make it fair. So we've moved from an ethic of inspiration followed by motivation followed by perspiration to improve a life to our present day of envy, greed, and entitlement. Envy, greed, and entitlement is a violation of the 10th commandment about covetousness. How is that improving any life if you envy what somebody else makes? There's not a fixed amount of income, and if you make more, you're robbing me. What have happened to entrepreneurial capitalism? Here's something else the same man said. Don't expect to build up the weak by tearing down the strong. On July 4th, 1926, on the 150th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, this man said, "We can't continue to enjoy the result if we neglect and abandon the cause." He also said, "I favor the policy of economy, not because I wish to save money, but because I wish to save people." And finally, one of my favorites, especially this time of year, the collection of any taxes which are not absolutely required, which do not, beyond reasonable doubt, contribute to the public welfare, is only a species of legalized larceny. All of those quotes are from my great uncle by marriage, the 30th President of the United States, Calvin Coolidge. I encourage you to read some of his speeches. It's true, he didn't say much, but when he said something, he had something to say. There's a famous joke about a woman who came through the receiving line at the White House and said, "Mr. President, I made a bet with a friend of mine that I can get you to say more than 2 words. Coolidge replied, "You lose." Good stuff. So what is the answer? What is the question? You can't give people everything that they want and expect to give them everything that they need. Liberty is what the founders wanted to give us. Small government, opportunity for all, which came later for some than for others. But at least the standard was set that Lincoln referred to in the Declaration and that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Brilliantly referred to as he called America to its higher purposes and higher calling of true equality, and that African Americans, and in fact every American, has value because they have been endowed by their creator, not the government. So we move from we the people to you the government, and that's why our government has become dysfunctional, and that's one of the reasons why we are so frustrated. We got back to constitutional government, living within our means, taking care of our own families first, looking to government as a last resort and not a first resource. We would find our government becoming functional again, and we would be securing the blessings of liberty that the founders had in mind for us. And now, this wonderful transition to my colleague and fellow Broadway musical lover, Carol Looper, who is going to treat me with such respect and honor and not ask me any tough questions. Carol?
You did not extract that promise from me in advance.
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I wouldn't expect any less.
Okay. While Cal is getting his microphone on. First of all, we are 3 weeks apart in age, but I'm not going to tell you which one of us is older. And we met through a mutual friend by the name of Marvin Hamlish, who was a wonderful composer, conductor, big-hearted friend to both of us. And although Cal and I really don't talk politics, I know that he and Marvin did, and I would have loved to have been in on some of your conversations. First question is going to be the first news question of the moment, which is at 11 o'clock. President Obama announced his Supreme Court nominee, Justice Merrick Garland. And I'm interested, he's 63 years old. I'm interested in your thoughts about this nominee and whether the president should have been, shall we say, bullied into not making a nomination.
No, it's his constitutional right, of course, to nominate anyone he wishes. And it is the Senate's constitutional right not to hold a hearing if they want. It's interesting in Washington, you know, people have such short memories. When President Obama was a senator from Illinois, and he made a speech on the Senate floor opposing the nomination of Justice Alito, not because he didn't think he was well qualified, which he admitted he was, but because he didn't like his politics. But of course, in Washington, you can be one thing yesterday and another thing today, and so the president's sending up somebody he knows is not going to get confirmed. And the fact that he's 63, I think, is an indication of that. The other one who was under consideration, the Indian gentleman whose name I'm going to have to practice to pronounce.
Sri Srinivasa.
Thank you so much, and Kazunai. I think, you know, is 43, I think, but he's going to save him for later in case Hillary wins the election. But I mean, you know, I like to say that the only politicians with convictions in Washington are in prison. The Republicans have promised absolutely no hearings. Well, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, developing a spine for some of these guys would be an amazing thing to see. So I don't know.
Talk about the results of last night's election. Is Donald Trump a shoo-in? Is he assured of the nomination?
No, I don't think. Well, he's got over half of the delegates required now, over 650. We're not counting Missouri yet because the spread there was 0.2%, as it was on the Democratic side, by the way, which was really amazing. If you made a bet in Las Vegas on this, you would be very, very wealthy right now. Both sides, 0.2%. It's incredible. I think, you know, we're still in the sorting out stage, and the establishment in Washington is very, very nervous and is fearful of losing power. I'm worried about Trump for a number of reasons. I've written a number of columns on this. I was one of those authors of National Review that Trump denounced. I wish he denounced me by name. I've never made Nixon's enemies list. I can't, Trump's so busy denouncing Megyn Kelly. Can't he include me once in a while? But I'm worried about anybody who doesn't have any specific ideas other than build the wall and make the Mexican government pay for it. I mean, that's so ridiculous. And, we're going to do trade deals with China. Oh, really? How are you going to do that? Well, we're just going to do it. And we're going to abolish the IRS. Well, that's a great applause line. Probably everybody here would like to see that. I certainly would. Corrupt agency. But he's not about specifics. He is the ultimate definition of a demagogue, and that worries me a lot. When you play to people's fears and not the better angels of their nature, I think that's a problem. And I think, it's good to be angry. There's a verse in Scripture that says, "Be angry, but sin not." I think he's doing both. I mean, some guy who gets at the way he's treated women, the things he said about women. I mean, a misogynist. Go down the list. I'm very worried about that. I really am.
So how did he get where he is? Who is supporting him, and can he do anything that would turn his supporters away? Well,
I think it was W.C. Fields, or it may have been somebody else, but I love the line, never underestimate the ignorance of the vast American electorate. And it's true. I mean, people have been described as low information voters. If you look at some of these man and woman on the street interviews, Jesse Waters on O'Reilly is one of those who does these. Go out and interview people, and they don't have a clue of what's going on. Now, you ask them about Kim Kardashian, yeah, they know all about her, but they don't know about anything that really matters. And I think their name should be taken. They should not be allowed to vote or reproduce, because we have enough morons in Washington already. We don't need any more. I think there's a lot of anger vote, and on the Democrat side too. I mean, Bernie Sanders gets out there railing against Wall Street, millionaires and billionaires, and all this stuff, and so there's a lot of anger on the left too. A lot of college students want their debt forgiven. Who wouldn't? Wouldn't that be a nice thing? So, but anger again isn't policy, and anger is not a sufficient reason to elect somebody.
So there's talk of a brokered convention. The Republican Rules Committee has this rule that he must get 1,237 delegates, plus a certain number of countries, but the Rules Committee is going to meet before the convention in Cleveland.
1 week before, yeah.
And that's going to be important this year?
Yeah, I think it'll be not so much a brokered, but a contested. There'll be a lot of dealing. You know, there's been certain benefits to the old back room, smoke-filled room way of doing things, where you had professionals who knew all of the political leadership, who knew of their weaknesses and strengths. They had personal relationships with them, and they would pick somebody who they thought could be the best nominee for their party. Since the McGovern rules changes in the Democratic Party and rules changes in the Republican Party, things are a lot different. And there are benefits and downsides to each one. But I think, of course, if Trump wins it outright, that's it. But if they tried to mess with the rules then, I think you would completely fracture the party and ruin it for some time to come, which, of course, for Democrats would be a very happy outcome. But I think, we need a strong two-party system. I mean, I'm always amused when I hear the people on the outside who didn't win the last election say, well, now, if you vote for us in the next election, we're going to be more moral and ethical and upright than these no-good, corrupt bums that are in there now. Oh, okay. So we throw out the bums and we bring them in, and it doesn't take very long before they become corrupt, too, because of all the money involved, and the objective is always to win the next election. It's not so much to actually solve problems, which is why the debt continues to grow, 19 trillion and counting. You know, Reagan had a great line among many. He said, the only proof of eternal life in Washington is a government program. And it's true. It's easier to kill a vampire than to drive a stake into a government program. So I have a certain theory about that you may want to ask about later, but go ahead.
I'm ready.
Oh, you're ready? Well, every government agency has a piece of authorizing legislation or a charter that established it. And within that legislation or charter is a reason for its creation. So my view is that every head of every agency ought to come before Congress, and not just to appeal for its budget reauthorization, but to justify its existence. If it's not living up to its charter or authorized piece of legislation, and if it's not doing so within a budget, and if the private sector can't do better, then we get rid of it. Why do we need a Department of Education? We're spending more per capita on public education in this country than ever, and we got kids graduating from college who can't find jobs. Why are we doing this? We've spent over $1 trillion since the war on poverty, the well-intentioned war on poverty begun by Lyndon Johnson, who wanted to wipe out poverty in America. And there are roughly as many poor people now as there were then. Over $1 trillion. A reasonable person might say, well, maybe this isn't working. Maybe we ought to try something else. Maybe money alone isn't the answer. But the bureaucracy, poverty's become a business. Education has become a business. And you try to change any of it, you're going to have unions, you're going to have poverty experts or people invested in this thing appearing on television, granny going over the cliff in a wheelchair, single mother in the gutter with a starving child, and all this kind of baloney that they throw up on TV for the low information voters. Somebody asked me once, with all these great thoughts of yours, why don't you ever think of running for office? I said, well, it did cross my mind once, but I took 2 aspirin, laid down for a while, and the feeling went away.
Paul Ryan and a lot of elected Republicans and the Republican National Committee appear to be part of a Stop Trump movement. But if they are the establishment and Trump and his supporters discount them, what difference can they of the establishment make?
You sound like Hillary Clinton there for a minute. What difference does it make? You mean she does? Absolutely. Yeah, well, absolutely.
Her voice is a
no
little
question
lower.
about that. Yeah. Well, look, this is a constitutional republic with democratic leanings, and I think if the so-called establishment tried to stop what the voters in the Republican Party want, they will be making a serious mistake. Remember that John Boehner was ousted because it was felt, among other things, that he was out of touch with the people who elected him to office and elevated him to the speakership. And the culture, the political culture right now is so toxic that if the Trump people think that his nomination, if indeed he has sufficient delegates by the time of the convention, is being stolen from him, they and an awful lot of other people are going to be very, very upset. And again, I think you'd see a massive walkout of Trump delegates. I think you'd see demonstrations in the street that might remind you in some ways of the 1968 Chicago Convention on the Democratic side. So, man, it's an interesting year. I'll tell you. People ask me, "Do you ever run out of subjects to write about?" I say, "You must be joking. I have to discard things. I got too many things to write about. It's amazing."
If Donald Trump should become the nominee, with all of the slings and arrows tossed by him and at him, could he find a vice presidential candidate?
Well, sure. You can always find somebody to do anything. But, I mean, look, Ross Perot got Stockman, you know, whose famous line at the first debate is, "I don't know why I'm here." Hey! Neither did a whole lot of other people. So, you know, you could always find somebody. I don't know. It's, yeah, I'm sure he'd find somebody because, you know, the lure of political power, even for the vice presidency, is pretty seductive. But don't tell Bill Clinton.
How do you feel about Dr. Ben Carson and Chris Christie jumping on Trump's bandwagon?
Well, I got to tell you, the Ben Carson thing was the most surprising of all. I mean, it would be like, you know, Hugh Hefner coming out in favor of virginity. I mean, it is so opposite everything that he stands for. The integrity, the incredible accomplishments of this brilliant man. To endorse a guy like this, I mean, you know, what do you like, an angel endorsing the devil? Pick your own analogy. I'm shocked in one way, but you know, again, the lure of political power and influence and higher speaking fees is very, very seductive, and it's disappointing, frankly. I don't think it'll do him a lot of good, Trump having Carson's endorsement, because I don't think a lot of the people who supported Carson. For all the right reasons, in my view, his integrity and so many other things, are going to transition to Trump just because Carson has endorsed him.
So Carson's endorsement, Christie's endorsement, Sarah Palin's endorsement, you don't see it as holding much weight, holding much water?
Sarah Palin is the biggest idiot I think I have ever come across. I mean, I'm sorry, look, I should be kind, I suppose, but I mean, if you just read the transcripts of some of her statements and interviews, it's like you took a dictionary and pulled words out of various pages and just put them on a page. It makes no sense. Nothing. I want to say, I turned to my wife and said, "What did she say?" I said, "I don't know." It's nuts how I mean, I understand why McCain picked her, but man, oh man, what a disaster. Can you imagine her becoming president? Oh, yeah.
You regularly bash Hillary Clinton in your columns. You also bash Barack Obama.
Well, I don't bash. I bash their policies. I met the president finally. You know, it was interesting. I met Hillary a couple of times. Got pictures with her in the White House.
So after all you've written about Hillary, and I don't think I've seen anything positive, but I haven't seen all of your columns.
No, you haven't. I'll tell you that right now.
And Donald Trump, you have obviously, you call it sewer politics, and you say calling it gutter politics would be a step up.
Right.
So if they're the two candidates, who are you going to vote for?
Well, you know, when President Obama was elected, I did write an early column saying that I was very proud of my country because I had worked as a journalist through the civil rights movement, and I'd seen the demonstrations, and I grew up in Washington, D.C., which was a segregated city well into the early 70s. And I was very proud of my country for electing the first African-American president. But we're so engaged in identity politics. Somebody asked me if I could ever vote for a woman for president. And I said, well, let me tell you a story. This woman with 5 children was interviewed once, and she was asked if she had to do it over again, would she have 5 kids? And she said, yes, just not these 5. And so I'm all for a woman president, just not Hillary. Give me a Margaret Thatcher type, I'm right there. It shouldn't be about gender. It shouldn't be about race. It shouldn't be about any of these other things. It's what's up here that ought to count, not what's anywhere else.
So how do you determine if it's Hillary and Trump, who you vote for?
Well, I think there'll be a lot of changes between, during the primaries, the Democrats run left, the Republicans run right, although I can't determine there's a whole lot of in Trump's policies, which he doesn't really have, that is right. And then they come back a little more to the center to attract the independents and the rest. So we'll have to see. It's only March. The conventions are in July and the elections in November. And so a lot can change in that time. Now, Trump said on Fox this morning, I'm a conservative. Well, nobody asked, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? He says, I'm going to name conservative justices to the Supreme Court. Oh, really? Well, you said your sister would make an ideal justice, and she's a very, very far-left liberal who doesn't even believe in curtailing partial birth abortion. So, this is like holding two contradictory thoughts in your mind at the same time. I mean, how does that work? I don't know. Ask O.J. Simpson.
People are voting for Bernie Sanders.
Yes,
People
they
are voting for Trump. People are, they're getting a lot of votes.
Yes.
So is the American public gullible?
Yes. Yes, of course. Haven't you noticed? P.T. Barnum, razzle-dazzle 'em from Chicago. Give them the old razzle-dazzle. How can they see with sequins in their eyes? What a great line that is. Isn't it true? You see, our problem is we don't pay attention between elections, but the politicians and the lobbyists and the special interests do. And we're swayed by the political commercials and the soundbite of the moment, and we don't realize that they've gone out and taken focus groups and polls to find out what line will most appeal to us. And so when they're talking, they're basically not really talking what they believe for the most part. They're talking what the focus groups and the pollsters say will get your vote. And that's why so many people are turned off, and one of the many reasons why Bernie Sanders is getting so much support, especially among the millennials.
Other than Silent Cal, who you mentioned,
Yes.
Calvin Coolidge, have you a favorite American president?
Well, everybody goes for Lincoln, of course. I mean, it's hard to top him. I live in Virginia, which is called the home of presidents. I think we've had, 4 or 5? John Adams was terrific. Jefferson, of course. It's all about the times. It's like baseball. You say, well, so-and-so, Ty Cobb or Mantle and Maris, they were of their time, and it's unfair to compare someone from the 19th century or even the early 20th century with, or even the late 18th century with today, because the circumstances are different. A real leader leads with convictions and with moral power and doesn't get too far out ahead of his people. You can have some good ideas, but if the people aren't there yet, then to try to impose them on folks when they're not ready can cause you problems electorally. So, no, not, well, I did like Reagan a lot because I knew him and Nancy, and I think, he did a lot and helped end the Cold War and bring down the wall, which came down during Bush 41's administration. And I think revived a spirit in America which had been lacking under Carter. And this is the real key. He let Americans know that government can't do as much for you as you can do for yourself. And, as JFK said in his 1961 inaugural speech, which I've kind of changed a little bit for today's purposes, he said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And I would ask what you can do for yourself. Because no government, no politician can improve your life better than you can by the decisions you make, by the person you marry, by the kind of father or mother you are, and all of those things, again, that we have a tradition of knowing what works. So.
Have you mellowed over the years, or have you become more rigid?
Oh, I'm much more rigid. Yes, I'm much more. No, look, I have friends on all sides, as you know, liberals, conservatives. Many of my friends are liberals, and I read, liberal columnists. People say, why do you read all those people? I remember a debate I did with George McGovern once a number of years ago at Butler University in Indiana. Very civil, very cordial. I admired the man greatly for his service in World War II. And at the end, one of my supporters came up out of the audience. I could tell he was on my side because he was wearing a blue suit and white socks. And he said, my wife and I'd like to take you out for a bite to eat. I said, well, thank you, but Senator and I have already made plans for dinner. He said, how can you eat with a man like that? I said, easy, he's a friend of mine. Your problem is you've identified a person's worth by their political philosophy. This is one of our problems. I mean, if we don't make this great experiment called America work, who will? We have plenty of people on the outside who want to destroy us. They go by name like ISIS, Taliban, Islamic radicalism, whatever you want to call them. Why are we trying to destroy each other? Reagan used to say we're only one generation away from losing it all, and it's true. Several years ago, I went to Normandy in France. One of my uncles was on D-Day at Omaha Beach, and I wanted to stand over there because I have huge admiration for that greatest generation, as Tom Brokaw called them. And I walked throughout the American cemetery and saw the crosses and stars of David, the grave markers, and these were mostly young men who would not marry or have families, the few who did, sergeants. And you know, next to the name and birth and death dates, there wasn't an R or D. Those people were not fighting for or against Franklin Roosevelt. They were fighting to maintain an American ideal. America has always been an idea in search of the ideal. We failed in some areas. We've tried to make it right. We're still trying to make it right, but we're moving forward. And to be at each other's throats all the time and to treat each other as enemies, I think only opens us up to being conquered by a foreign power.
In a few minutes, we're going to go to audience questions. Please start having your questions ready. There's a microphone there. You can start lining up now. But I have one final question. I don't recall reading anything positive about President Obama in any of your columns.
Well, I wrote one when he made his race speech in, I think it was in Chicago. And I thought it was, and I said so, I thought it was eloquent. And again, you know, I grew up in segregated Washington. The first African Americans I met were when I played basketball. I mean, other than our maid, you know. Matter of fact, Jesse Jackson and I had agreed at one point to write a book together, and it never came to fruition because, you know, he didn't follow up. But I like doing things like that. It confuses a lot of people because they think, well, now why would you know, why would the guy, you know, look what he stands for and all. I said, yeah, but I mean, I know him. This is the problem. We don't get beyond labels, you know, left, right, religious, secular, Democrat, Republican. Somebody once asked me, what's your denominational background? I said, 5s, 10s, 20s, 50s, and 100s. Because you see, if I give you a label, you're going to then define me by your understanding of the label, which may or may not have anything to do with who I am. So ask me what I believe or think, and I'm happy to tell you. But yeah, I've written a couple of things. I mean, he's a very nice guy. I met him for the first time, actually. I've tried to get him to see him for a long time, but at the Gridiron dinner last year in Washington, and I said some personal things to him that were very positive, and he thanked me very much, and that was that. So,
is it hurting the reputation and the high honor of the presidency to call him out regularly?
Well,
does it diminish the presidency?
No more than when people on the left called Reagan a cowboy and a dunce and an actor and all those other things. Look, I don't mind spirited political speech and dialogue. And I mean, you go back and look at the Thomas Jefferson, John Adams race. Holy smokes. Under today's libel laws, both of them could have sued each other. Yeah, some of the media then. My colleague Eric Burns wrote a wonderful book on colonial journalism called Infamous Scribblers. Some of the things that were printed in the papers about somebody having out-of-wedlock children, having affairs with so-and-so, and I mean, it could get you sued today. But so there's always been this kind of stuff, but you have to ultimately trust in the wisdom of the American people that when they get the facts, they're going to make the right decision. They don't always, but most of the time they do.
Cal, it is CMC's tradition to take audience questions.
Good.
Please state your name, ask your question, and we thank you in advance for not making long editorial statements. Let's start with the first question.
My name is Harvey Hook. Delighted to be here. Cal, welcome back to Columbus.
Thank you.
I would like your insight to response to several things I heard last night in the post-primary coverage. Number one, our Senator John Kasich, after having won his first state governor, after having won his
Don't let him vote.
his first primary, indicated it was going to create the groundswell that would carry him to the party nomination this fall. Secondly, Mr. Trump, after referring to Mr. Rubio as diminutive, large-eared, lightweight, last night made a lot of very positive comments to him. Bright man with a great future. And then former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, upon giving her speech to her audience, gave an overview of America that sounded far more like an overview of the nation of Cuba than the United States. Number one, why do these individuals make those statements, and who are they speaking to? Because they're not speaking to many in the American population.
They make those statements because they're politicians, and they're speaking to the unpersuaded, low-information voters out there who really don't pay a whole lot of attention. It's very sad. It really is. Yeah, I mean, one day Rubio is a twerp and a midget, and the next day he's a potential great statesman and a great American. I mean, you know, come on. You just wish they'd be honest. If he'd said, I still think you're a jerk, at least I would respect him for being consistent. But, you know.
Thanks.
Thank goodness we didn't go beyond the hands last night. But anyway. Yes, hello.
Hi, Cal. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
We had dinner with Carol and Cal last night, and you had some stories and had some thoughts about the difference between Washington 20, 30 years ago as far as the camaraderie between the parties and the legislators and where it is today. Just share some of those stories and also just comment on how do we get back to some sort of decent camaraderie in Washington so that there can be some logic.
Well, it's difficult. I tell the story of Joe Lieberman, who after Bush 43's speech to Congress following 9/11, Bush came down from the podium and Lieberman embraced him and kissed him on both cheeks. It was a beautiful moment. This Democrat from Connecticut and this Republican from Texas. And people were almost in tears, except Lieberman's opponents in Connecticut, who used that clip in a political commercial against him. And this is the kind of stuff that we confront now. You have Republicans and Democrats who eat at separate restaurants. They don't want to be photographed together because they fear that an opponent, a primary opponent, might accuse them of being a compromiser and eating with the devil and this kind of thing. So the whole political conversation has become corrupted and poisoned. If I had a solution, maybe I'd run for president, but I don't. It's been exacerbated by talk radio, by cable TV. I've been invited. I told a story once. I was invited on Good Morning America and hadn't heard anything from the travel office, so I called up New York and I said, hey, I haven't got my plane reservation yet. Oh, yeah, good. Thanks for calling. We decided to go with somebody different. I said, why is that? And she said, we wanted somebody edgier. So they want an Ann Coulter who's, you know, instead of somebody who can reasonably discuss something, even with a political opponent. And that's how things get corrupted. Again, it's like wrestling. It's fake. It's not real, but it's entertainment. So it's very sad. So I think it has to begin with all of us. I mean, when Bob Beckel and I go out and do our Common Ground Dog and Pony show, one of the things he says is, look, if you've never met a Democrat, he happens to be a Democrat, of course. If you're a Republican, never met a Democrat, go have a conversation. Sit down and have a meal. Listen to the other person. It doesn't mean you'll get up from the table agreeing with everything they say, but you will at least get to know them better, and you will have, hopefully, a level of respect that you didn't have before. And by having the conversation, you might learn something from them, and they might learn something from you. But if you're constantly dumping on the other person and their party or whatever, you're not going to get anywhere. And it becomes just a game. A game. You won this election. Now I got to work to beat you next. Nobody's ever persuaded. Nobody's ever convinced. Nobody's ever converted to your point of view with that kind of attitude. So I wish it was better, but let it begin with you in Columbus. Yes, sir.
Hey, Cal. First of all, thank you for joining us today. Really liked it. So I'm going to piggyback off of Carol's Obama statement. And
yeah.
Particularly in 2012, you wrote a lot of articles critical of the administration and their policies. And in most of those articles, you had two data points, which were gas prices and unemployment. Since both of those have dropped significantly, has it changed your view of the administration and their policies.
Well, it's interesting about gas prices because when gas prices were high, the Democrats blamed Bush. And of course, a president doesn't have any control over the price of gasoline, whether a Republican or a Democrat. So now that gas prices have fallen, Democrats are saying, well, the president ought to get credit. Those are the same Democrats who were criticizing Bush because, prices were too high. And with respect to unemployment, as you probably know, there are something like 95 million people out of the labor force, and so they're not counted in the unemployment rate. It's sort of like, if you emptied the prisons, then the crime rate would drop substantially until the prisoners committed more crimes, of course. So a lot of these figures are manipulative and phony and the rest. And a lot of those people who've gotten jobs, by the way, are either part-time jobs or they're jobs that pay less than the kind of jobs they wanted, or they're not the kind of jobs they wanted at all, but they have to have something coming in. So, and when we have a growth rate of only around 2 to 3%, when it ought to be above 4 and even 5%, you're going to have employers reluctant to hire people. You're going to have, particularly with Obamacare and the results of that, you're going to have more and more employers who don't want to pay for an employee's insurance. And you're going to have companies with 50 or 49 employees not wanting to add another one because then it would put them above the threshold for a requirement of health insurance under Obamacare. So you have all those factors, but look, I would be happy if the economy was booming right now under a Democrat president, and I would be happy to give him credit for it, but I don't see it. But good question.
Hi, Mr. Thomas. Thanks
Yes,
for being
sir.
here today.
You're
Andy
welcome.
Campbell.
Yes.
So we've talked a lot about Trump, but there are still two other horses in the race,
Yes, there are.
Cruz and Kasich. Could you talk a little bit about their hopes, dreams, and aspirations as we look to August?
Well, Cruz is a little more, I guess, if you can use the word acceptable to some people than Trump, because at least he has something of a record. I mean, he was what was it, Attorney General or some legal office in Texas, and he'd been a senator, a one-termer, of course, but he has a voting record. He makes all of these incredible promises, and he's going to be doing so much on day one, he won't be able to watch the inaugural parade. I mean, he got a long list of stuff there, So I'd take all these promises with a grain of salt. I've been around a long time, seen these people come and go, and I'll believe it after it happens. Plus, you've got the Congress. And even if Cruz or Kasich were to win, and even if the Republicans continue to control the Senate and the House, it's not a done deal because they've got their own interests, their own state or local interests as well. And so just because the president says something, it doesn't mean they're necessarily going to do it. So, this is what keeps me in business.
The people in this room are mostly very much aware of John Kasich.
Yes, I would imagine so.
When did you become aware of John Kasich, and have you written him off?
Well, I've known John for some time. When he, of course, was in the House, he talks about his record there, which is very substantial, and working with the Clinton administration on welfare reform and reducing the deficit. And he has a lot of, I think he's a good man. He wrote a book, can't remember the title of it right now, but it was about, I think, his spiritual journey, and I think he's a good and decent man. The problem is good and decent isn't enough in this election cycle, as we've seen from a guy who is leading, who's had 3 wives and brags on his affairs and says that if his daughter wasn't his daughter, he'd be dating her. I mean, that's creepy in the extreme to me. I don't know about you. Almost as bad as Hugh Hefner in silk pajamas. But, I mean, I wrote in the National Review piece, I said, temperament is critical in a president. And I don't believe Trump has it. I think Kasich has it. I think he's a good guy. I think... I think Rubio had it, but he's out. Again, wrong guy at the wrong time. I don't know how this is going to turn out. It's day to day. I mean, it's so in flux. It's less predictable than a cake in the oven. At least if you put the right ingredients in the bowl, you stir it properly, you put it in the oven at the right temperature, and for the right amount of time, you're going to get a cake, right? But you don't know all the ingredients going into this mixture, what's going to become of it. It could be that little Jack-in-the-Box thing clown that comes up and surprise. Whoo!
I have
Well, thank you. Mr. Thomas, thanks for being here. My name is Emmett Kelly. I'm a member of our board here for the CMC, so we really appreciate you being here. Appreciate your insights.
Hey, how often do you get the joke?
Every day.
That's
but
what I thought,
but
yeah.
from educated people.
Thank you very
Wait
much.
till you hear the guy's name after me.
Okay. Very good, very good.
I might be wrong on this, but I think I remember, it's been a while since I read anything other than things for my clients. But the New Deal era, I think, really brought the words conservative and liberal labels to those that supported and those that were against the New Deal programs. One of the things we hear about all over the country is our deteriorating infrastructure. Any thoughts or ideas on if there should be like a WPA program or what have you to help our localities and our states with respect to, bridges, sewer, water sector?
Well, of course, this administration had promised the stimulus package was going to take care of all of that. And before that, we had the gas tax. The gas tax was supposed to be used to keep up the roads and bridges and stuff. So we got all this money coming in, but where does it all go? How come it hasn't been fixed? Shovel-ready jobs, remember? Even Joe Biden had to admit in a very famous soundbite that, gee, I guess they weren't all shovel-ready after all. Well, what happened to all that stimulus money? What happened to the gas tax? Where did it all go? How come it didn't go for the objectives, the stated objectives? That's what I want to know. That's why I think we need an audit of the federal government from top to bottom. Now, Newt Gingrich, when he led the Republican Revolution in the House, I talked to him the other day about this. I said, whatever happened to that audit? He said, well, first we found out that the House had never been audited ever in its entire history. This is what happens when you're spending other people's money, Hey, who cares, Not my money. You have to balance your checkbook, but the government never has to balance its checkbook. So, I'd like to know what happened to the money before we create another government program, because all this stuff was supposed to be spent on these various things. It's scandalous, but Good question.
I'm a little embarrassed to even come up here after that introduction here. My name is Kermit Whitfield, and I'm also a member of the Board of Trustees.
Say hello to Miss Piggy for me. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Plays right into your bit here.
Yeah, it's good.
So there's been a lot of talk over the past few weeks, and especially with the rise of Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, about the potential of fundamental realignments of the parties here. I'd love to get your thoughts on what you think about the potential of that actually happening, and if so, how does the political system move forward?
Well, here's the thing about that. It sounds interesting, but I don't think it's going to happen. First of all, I don't know what it means. You had, before the so-called social conservatives decided to come out of their catacombs and join the Republican Party following, really leading up to Jimmy Carter, because there were a lot of Christians, for example, who voted for Carter just because he had a strong faith and was very open about it, and I was one of them. But then they were disappointed by Carter's performance. And when Reagan came along, even though he was a non-churchgoer, had been divorced, didn't, threw a couple of Bible verses out there every now and then, but didn't seem like, the Carter profile in matters of faith anyway. They excused all of that and they said, well, and I think we've seen that come up with Trump in the extreme. Okay, he doesn't believe as we believe. He doesn't live the kind of lifestyle that we think is biblically based, and all this other stuff, but we don't care. We want the country fixed, and we're not electing a pastor. That's the latest line on this. So compromise is an amazing thing. I think in order for a realignment, I don't know how that would work, because the economic conservatives, the so-called establishment in the party, need the social conservatives because they weren't winning without them before, and they can't win without them again. The Democrats don't have this problem. So I don't know what a realignment would mean. It'll be interesting to see. Again, I'm not a prophet or the son of one, so I can't forecast the future. I can't even remember what I did yesterday, much less what I'm going to do tomorrow. But it's an interesting question, and one we should all keep in mind. Yes, sir. You are?
Last question.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mike Brewster. Thanks for being here, Mr. Thomas.
You don't have a funny name. Okay.
No, I don't. Last question. During your opening remarks, you talked a little bit about the bizarre nature of this election and how unpredictable it is. I want to see, do you think this election is going to go down in history as just that, a bizarre election, or do you think that this one has the ability to kind of change the tenor and tone of elections going forward.
I will tell you this, and I will predict this, and this will be the only prediction I make today, and you can write it down because it will come true. This election will go down in history. Thank you very much.
Well,
Let's thank Cal Thomas and our great host, Carol Looper. It's been a great conversation. So there's Mo, there's Emmett, Kermit. What the hell's wrong with our board? I don't know what's going on. Thanks, everybody, for being here. We look forward to you continuing the conversation in the lobby over coffee and cookies. As you know, you can always watch our forums on WOSU Public Media, as well as on Columbus Television and through the CMC website. Thank you so much for being here. We'll see you next week.
Get one of my books out there. You'll love it.